Thank you, Sue, and thanks to the TransGrid team for the invitation to speak to you today. Late last year, CSIRO was commissioned to report what we call the energy efficiency ecosystem in regard to the Sydney region, and that report is also up on the Powering Sydney website. So this presentation will just give a quick rundown on the main findings of that work and also highlight what role energy efficiency could play in the solution for inner Sydney. Just an overview of what I'll cover in the presentation. So I'll start off with defining energy efficiency. What is it? Also what it is not. I'll outline some of the drivers, so things that promote the uptake of energy efficiency measures, and the various barriers, things that can restrict the uptake of energy efficiency. It's also important to acknowledge that decisions about energy efficiency don't take place in a vacuum. The attitudes of individuals and organisations matter, and they can give a boost to the drivers or overcome some of the barriers, or of course have the opposite effect. And then I'll cover where the prospective energy efficiency gains might be based on the consumption in the inner Sydney area. And then I'll finish off with some stats on the potential impact of energy efficiency and what that could mean for the demand. So it might surprise you to know, but despite its widespread use, energy efficiency does not have a universally accepted definition. There are many definitions out there, but typically whatever definition you find is usually saying something about a reduction in the energy used to provide a given level of service, whether that's the heating or cooling in a home, the amount of lighting that you have. So the key thing is less electricity input for either the same output or in some cases even more output. The obvious examples there are installation of more efficient equipment for different end uses. So the swap out of incandescents with compact fluorescence, and then also for light emitting diodes, LEDs is a good example there. Installation of more energy efficient air conditioner or commercial HVAC system. But it's not only about installing new kit and new technology. It can also just be from actually utilising what you have more effectively. So better operation and maintenance of the existing equipment that uses energy. Basic example, cleaning filters on an air conditioner will actually make it run how it's designed to run. Leak detection in refrigeration systems. Actually reducing wastage, so there's actually load that's not providing service. And it could be something like updating your software in your building management system to make your systems run more efficiently. There is a bit of a grey area in what is energy efficiency versus energy conservation. So an actual explicit decision to reduce the amount of energy consumption by accepting a decline in the energy service, if you actually want less heating, less cooling, may not actually be energy efficiency since the actual activity has changed. And in terms of relating to what Mel talked about with demand response, it's very similar concepts, energy efficiency and demand response. But energy efficiency is a bit more enduring. It has a long-term impact on reducing energy consumption, whereas demand response is more of a short-term sort of decision to reduce consumption, maybe in response to a specific event. But same as demand response, energy efficiency also has a role in reducing the actual demand, which is what matters for the network, and actually filling part of that demand gap. In terms of the drivers then, I mean, we characterise them in 4 broad groups. We have our economic drivers. So what are the net savings of an actual energy efficiency measure compared to its costs? Things like the capital cost, whether it's upfront, the payback period set by the end user, even the tariff structure, all has an impact on that economic driver. The table on the right shows there's a whole raft of policies in the energy efficiency space. The listing starts with some sort of national-based policies. get the pointer working. Down there around energy efficiency opportunities, the larger sort of policy measures, building standards, minimum energy performance standards and different forms of mandatory disclosure. But there are also some state-based New South Wales schemes like the Energy Savings Scheme and BASICS, of course. In terms of the traffic light key, the green says that some of these are actually fully implemented. The yellow says, well, some are partially, and the red means some actually haven't been implemented yet. And the various policies have different levels of impact. So high impact means it has a big impact on usage and promoting energy efficiency compared to something that's rated more medium or low. There's also things called sustainability targets, and this could be more general thing around carbon reduction as usual goal, but a way to achieve that is actually reducing energy, possibly through energy efficiency. And this can be local government targets, so the City of Sydney's target for 70% cut by 2030 is an example. But also large organisations typically have these targets, and that will actually drive them to implement energy efficiency. And then there's another category around green leases, which places obligations on commercial building owners based on certain size buildings and minimum energy performance standards they have to achieve. Well, in terms of the barriers then, things that sort of limit the uptake or prevent how much energy efficiency could be implemented. There's a big listing on the left there, everything from things around technology, prices, the impact of policy, market structures themselves, actual individual values and how people make these decisions, and how they're actually going to be financed and whether people, individuals or organisations have the right incentives. So that sort of influence diagram on the right, I mean, it looks complicated because it is complicated. So this is where the decision's actually taking place there. And you can see that it's not a question of one barrier possibly being the road, but it can be multiple barriers interacting with one another. So at a high level, energy policy has a significant influence on many aspects of these decisions. Things around those drivers I had on the previous table, what policies are in place and the behaviour they drive, but also an impact pricing structures and technology development. Information accessibility is another one of those behavioural sort of barriers. Just a lack of adequate information about what the different energy efficiency options are, how effective they are, how they compare to each other. It can prevent the most effective energy use behaviour from occurring. And this interacts with decision structures. So it can be decisions around how organisations make decisions on energy efficiency. Do they have high hurdle rates, which can actually be a barrier to implementing things that might cost a bit more up front? So they can actually put a brake on energy efficiency measures getting past those decision-making processes. So whether it's something like the drivers or the barriers, it's important to understand that all these things are acting in a broader social context, and the importance of attitudes, both personal and institutional aspects are operative here. So as far as individuals' attitudes go, their beliefs, their personal values, their social norms, their own capacity to make decisions, these various traits impact the decision-making process. So, for example, just providing more information to someone to make an energy efficiency decision may not actually lead to that outcome, because the individual's decision-making might actually be more influenced by their peers or by their own network, what their mates are telling them, rather than some unknown third party. And then there are institutional aspects around how social attitudes become embedded in decision-making structures within institutions. So, for example, organisations may place very little value on energy efficiency, with any proposals that are put forward can't get some traction. But if it is valued within the organisation, well, those barriers can be overcome. To isolate where the prospective energy efficiency opportunities could be, we need an understanding of the load. So using some course data for Greater Sydney, we found that it was basically a third split between industrial, commercial and residential. But when you look at the inner city, and the anecdotal evidence for the inner city is that there's probably less commercial and much greater proportion of commercial and residential loads as a proportion. So putting up some examples of where the actual energy is being used. On the left we have this sort of pie chart that gets thrown up for the residential sector. You can see that space heating and cooling and water heating around 40% of the load. And then there's various other plug loads around white goods, cooking, electronic devices, pool pumps and smaller loads. As far as the commercial sector goes, you'll notice, and this is an example for office buildings, which of course dominate in an area like the CBD. You can see this very large wedge there, HVAC, that's heating, ventilation and air conditioning, nearly half the load of a typical office building. You also notice that lighting's another much more significant load than residential, at around a quarter. And then there are another plug loads in this other category, usually around information and computer technology and that sort of thing. So existing studies, particularly in the commercial sector, indicate that HVAC measures have a lot of potential for energy efficiency, typically in high-rise buildings, large retail outlets, hotels and hospitals. And it's not only about installing more efficient equipment when the old equipment comes up for replacement, or there's a general refurbishment of the property. But there's also some quick gains that can actually be made in actually running the existing systems a bit better. So the operation and maintenance of those systems can get some significant short-term gains. Of course, in terms of the impact on the network, commercial could be more relevant than residential in the inner city area. So Mel had the chart of the timing of the peak as far as the inner city is concerned. It tends to be the middle of the day to the mid-afternoon. Those loads are running at that time of day, whereas the heating or cooling loads in residential is more taking place towards the end of the day. So maybe more relevant for the issue in the inner city. Well, what could the impact on consumption in the study area, in the inner city area actually be? And this is just looking out to 2020. We just looked at in the report, at some estimates of some recent, very broad studies that were done. So the Australian Energy Market Operator, some studies by ClimateWorks, work we did in the Future Grid Forum, and also the work that was done by SKM for the federal government around the Energy Savings Initiative. So you can see there's a low for the different studies, what they called the medium, and then of course the high. So quite a big range there, but in the middle of the range scenario, looking at a 3 to 6% reduction in baseline consumption out to 2020. But of course there's a lot more variation in the high range, as high as around 11% in the AME study, down to around 4% in the SKM study. And the extent of the uptake in those studies is just the relative importance of all these economic drivers, policy drivers, the barriers, and what's assumed about people's social attitudes. How much do they actually take up, even if it is economic? So in the high efficiency scenarios, the assumptions are that you have stronger economic drivers, lower rates on capital, shorter payback periods, or more stringent policy comes in, compared to the medium and low. So the large variation shows it's quite a bit of uncertainty in how much you can get out of energy efficiency in terms of quantifying the potential impact, but certainly it's expected that it will have an impact on reducing consumption in the future. Just to wrap up, so there is a lot to this energy efficiency space. It's a very broad concept. It's definitely had an impact on reducing consumption up till now, and it definitely will in the future. And there's a lot of debate about how much you can get. multiple drivers and barriers that operate within a social context, and would be very keen to get the views around the room around what drivers and barriers either individuals or their organisations have found, what they've encountered and what suggestions they have to overcome them. While our review indicates that the HVAC area might be something, just because of the size of the opportunity and some near-term gains that can be had, particularly in commercial buildings, that could be something TransGrid, Ausgrid could look to target. But again, we're keen to know the views around the room, get your ideas in your workbooks. In any case, to really firm up how much could be achieved, some more detailed work needs to be done to focus on what it could do for the inner city area. And that's it. Thanks.